What if I told you that you could get into law school without taking the LSAT? No logical reasoning, no reading comprehension, no test day pressure, just you apply and you get in. That idea used to be a fantasy and now it's technically allowed. Recently, the American Bar Association voted to allow law schools to apply for permission to admit students without requiring a standardized test like the LSAT. So it is true now that, yes, in theory, a law school can admit you without an LSAT score, but here's the uncomfortable truth. This change sounds bigger than it actually is. And if you misunderstand how it works, you could make a strategic mistake that costs you scholarships, leverage, or realistic chances of admission. So let's slow this down and look at what actually changed and what absolutely did not. The American Bar Association did not remove the LSAT requirement. Instead, they introduced a mechanism called a variance. A variance is special permission. It is an exception granted on a case by case basis. What the American Bar Association is now saying is if a law school wants to experiment with admitting some students without a standardized test, it may apply for that exception, but the school still has to explain how it will evaluate applicants, how it will maintain academic standards, and how it will track outcomes like GPA performance, attrition, and bar passage rates. Then we will decide whether to allow it. If the school's request is approved, it gets permission for a limited period of time, usually 3 to 5 years. After that, one of three things happens. The school reapplies, the ABA denies renewal of its request, or the school reverts to traditional test required admissions. And so this structure tells you something important. The ABA is just gathering data here. This is not a mandate, it's not automatic, it's not universal, and it's definitely not permanent. No law school is required to participate in the new test optional regime. No school is guaranteed approval to go test optional, and no law school can abandon standardized testing indefinitely under this rule. And all of this matters because it explains why the LSAT is still very much alive. Even after this change, the LSAT remains deeply embedded in how law schools operate. The first big factor is the US News rankings. Rankings still reward schools for high LSAT medians. They reflect prestige, applicant quality, alumni donations, and employer perception. Schools aren't casually going to give any of that up. The second big factor is scholarship. Law LSAT scores are not just tools for getting you into law school, they're also tools for getting you discounts on your tuition. Merit scholarships are largely allocated based on LSAT-driven competition. If you've got a strong LSAT score, it's not just getting you in, it's often determining whether you pay sticker price for tuition or you graduate with minimal debt. If you remove the LSAT as a factor, the schools lose one of their cleanest ways to justify merit-based aid. This means scholarships become harder to access and more discretionary. Now, the third big factor is risk management. Law schools are judged in part by the bar passage rates of their graduating students. If their graduates fail the bar in large numbers, their ABA accreditation is threatened. Now, the LSAT is, of course, imperfect, but it still is one of the strongest predictors for first-year performance and bar passage rates. Schools are not eager to give up on predictive tools like the LSAT unless they're confident they have replacements, which they currently don't. Now, there are two forces pushing the ABA to experiment anyway with going LSAT optional. The first big force is access and optics. The LSAT has long been criticized for favoring applicants with time, with money, and access to high-quality prep resources. And that criticism isn't wrong. Every standardized test reflects socioeconomic disparities. The ABA wants to test whether alternative admissions frameworks can reduce barriers without harming outcomes. The second big factor is enrollment pressure. Law schools are mostly tuition-driven institutions. And there are long-term demographic trends that suggest there are going to be fewer applicants in the future due to the demographic cliff. Fewer people graduating college, fewer people applying to law school. That puts these institutions under threat. And so test optional policies are going to widen the funnel, allowing them to source more applicants. More applicants means more tuition revenue and more flexibility for schools that are struggling to fill seats. And of course, the ABA is not making this change in isolation. There are many other graduate and professional programs that have already gone test optional. And so legal education is actually just catching up. It's a bit behind the times, but they want to do so cautiously, of course. Now, the top tier schools, the T14, the Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and so on, they are more elite programs that are still constrained by their rankings and maintaining their reputations. And so they might admit a small number of students without LSAT scores, but those are often non-traditional applicants with extraordinary backgrounds. The majority of admits, though, are still going to have strong LSAT scores. Then you have the lower ranked schools that are constrained by bar passage requirements. Those schools can't afford to admit large cohorts without predictive metrics. The LSAT still remains their safest tool to make sure they are admitting students who are likely to pass the bar and likely to get employment upon graduation. But then you have those mid-tier schools, which is where most of the experimentation is going to happen, but they're going to do so carefully. So they might have some limited slots for test optional students. They're still definitely going to require strong GPAs, and they're going to have a preference for students with more rigorous majors in undergrad. They're going to prefer non-traditional or part-time applicants if they are going test optional, and they're going to track outcomes closely. And so these schools are going to test small at first. They're going to measure outcomes aggressively, and they will expand only if the results justify it. Now, here's what almost no headline explains. Going test optional doesn't make it easier to get in. In fact, it makes your application more risky because with no LSAT score, your GPA is going to matter more. Where you went to undergrad is going to matter more. Your application essays are going to matter more. Same goes for your letters of rec. Same goes for your resume. And if any of those are merely good instead of exceptional, you lose that margin for error. And your scholarship negotiation leverage is going to drop severely. The LSAT gives schools permission to invest in you financially because you applying with a strong LSAT helps them in the rankings and helps them mitigate their risk around whether you are going to pass the bar, whether you're going to get employment, whether you're going to succeed in 1L. And so without the LSAT score, they rely more on subjective judgment, which of course is riskier. And so they're going to favor safer and cheaper admits. And so if you are applying to law school anytime in the next 5-10 years, the rational move, the safe move is to not bet on the LSAT disappearing. Instead, think about it this way. The LSAT is still the most powerful variable you control. Your GPA is probably pretty fixed at this stage, but your LSAT score is not because you can, of course, study more, you can retake. If you have a strong LSAT score, you can expand your school list, you improve your scholarship odds, you reduce your risk of not getting in somewhere good, and it maintains your leverage in one of the most competitive cycles in recent memory. So test optional is just a recent experiment, but the LSAT is your leverage. And in a competitive zero-sum competition, leverage is everything. So ignore the headlines, take the LSAT, do well, and use your LSAT advantage while it still clearly exists. And if you'd like my help getting the strongest LSAT score, whether you're taking it for the first time or you're retaking, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free LSAT tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That's an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I will meet with you personally one-on-one to help you talk through your LSAT action plan, whether you're taking the LSAT for the first time or you're retaking it, whether you're taking it in April, June, or August beyond. I'm happy to help you out, help you craft your plan of attack. And by the way, folks, if you find these lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, Same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching this. If you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So please share this to your socials. Share it on Facebook, groups, or LinkedIn, or group chats, or Discord, subreddits, wherever you know others studying for the LSAT, other pre-laws. I do appreciate your support. See a question here from Mindless Scrolling asking, my LSAT GPA is a 374, and I'm PTing at a 155. I want to go to a top 14 law school. How unlikely is this? Okay, so I'm glad you shared your LSAT GPA because that's the only GPA that really matters. You have your official transcript GPA from undergrad, but LSAT then converts that into a standardized GPA because different schools have different grading systems. They want to make it apples to apples. And so the LSAT GPA is the one that law schools actually look at. And the top 14 law schools, for reference, their GPA medians are all roughly a 3.9 or so. Their LSAT medians are 170 to 174. And so with a 374, you are roughly 0.16 below the LSAT GPA for those T14 schools. So you're below GPA. That means you want to be above on the LSAT median. Now, the LSAT medians are 170 to 174. So your practice test average being a 155 is frankly way below. And so you would want to get your GPA above a 3.9 significantly, get it to a 4.0, or you'd want to get your LSAT score above a 174. Now, which of those is easier? Easier to get your LSAT up because you earn your GPA over the course of 3 to 4 years. You can't easily redo all of your undergraduate bachelor's, but you can retake the LSAT. And so my advice to you is retake the LSAT, improve your score by 20 points. That will put you in a much better position to get into some of the T14. So right now with your stats, you asked how unlikely. It is frankly very unlikely because you're significantly below on both the LSAT and the GPA. But the LSAT's not a done deal because you can retake. Coming up, we have the April LSAT in 2 months. We have the June LSAT in 4 months, August LSAT in 6 months. You could take any of those. You could take all of those. And law schools only consider your highest LSAT score on record. They don't penalize you for multiple takes. They don't average multiple takes. And so get your LSAT score up significantly by at least 20 points, and you'll be in a much better position to get into some of the T14. Your GPA will still be sub-median, but that's okay. You can be below on one if you are above on the other. And to maximize your admissions, maximize where you apply. In other words, I'm saying blanket the T14, apply to every single one of the top 14 law schools. If you can get your LSAT up to 175 or so, you will then likely get into some of them, of course. That's not a promise or a guarantee. Every cycle is different, and I cannot guarantee you admission to any school. That's up to the law schools, not me, but I'm just speaking probabilistically here about what it will take to maximize your admissions. I see you're taking it in June, so you've got 4 months. That's plenty of time to improve significantly. Then the question is, what are you going to do differently? How much have you studied so far? What resources have you used? Have you taken a course? Have you gotten coaching? Have you got a custom detailed study plan? Have you been using real, actual, official LSAT practice tests on LawHub? There may be a lot of untapped potential or a lot of low-hanging fruit if you've only been self-studying so far. And so if you want to talk through what a proper prep plan could look like with some more support to level up your studying to get you those 20 points in 4 months, feel free to book the free LSAT tutoring with me. Links in my bio. Happy to talk you through your plan of attack to help you get those 20 points by June for the T14. I see A is asking any tips for a 2.9 GPA with a 171 LSAT. Well, the first question I have is, are you still an undergrad? How much undergrad do you have left? In other words, can you boost up your undergrad GPA? Because 2.9 is low, of course. If we can at least get that into the 3.0 range, optically, it'll look a lot better. A 3 point something, it looks a lot nicer than a 2.9 something. And so if we can raise it by just 0.1, it's going to look a lot nicer. And law school admission officers themselves are subject to the same visual biases as all of us are when it comes to those little differences. So just like a 170 looks a lot better than a 160 GPA. So if you could boost your GPA up just a little bit, It's going to help. Regardless, though, can we get your LSAT score even higher? Because there are still 9 points between a 171 and a 180. Not saying you got to have a 180, of course, but if we can get you at least a couple points higher, that's going to help a lot too. So my biggest advice would be, let's get your LSAT up, let's get your GPA up. Those are the biggest things you can do. I see Josh was asking about opinions on non-T14 schools. Well, different schools have different benefits, right? When you go to a top 14 law school, you benefit from the prestige, from the brand, from the employment pipeline to big law, for example. So there are benefits to going T14, to going to a top law school with more of a brand name. There are also benefits to going to a non-T14 law school, especially if you can get significant scholarship money. So there are trade-offs between going to a more prestigious school and going to a lower ranked school where you get more scholarship aid. And in some cases, it might be better to go to a lower ranked school and get more scholarship money than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money. So part of it depends on your goals post-graduation. So consider carefully how much scholarship money you can get by going to a lower ranked school. And maybe you say to yourself, you know what, based on my goals, I want to choose the scholarship money, go for a full ride, not take on any debt, not pay anything for law school. In other cases, if you really want to go big law or you're willing to take on debt, it might be better to go to the higher ranked school. They each have their benefits. I see Lucky Lancelot's asking, if I score a 175, could that offset a sub 3.0 GPA for undergrad? Yeah, it could. That's exactly the idea here, right? As I've been sharing. So for folks who have a lower GPA, but a higher LSAT, they're so-called slitter applicants, which is totally fine. Law schools actually weigh your LSAT more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. And so your GPA might be pretty fixed at this point, but your LSAT score is still the biggest needle mover you have to boost your odds of admission and get you scholarship money. And so if your GPA is a done deal, just switch gears, focus on the LSAT. It's kind of funny how a single day, 2.5 hours, taking the LSAT weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined, but because the LSAT is the one objective standardized metric, whereas different undergrad GPAs from different schools with different majors are more apples to oranges, not quite as comparable, they focus more on the LSAT for that reason. I see Arby's asking how these metrics affect scholarships. And so basically, law schools are heavily incentivized to raise their standing in the US News rankings. And so what law schools do is they look at the LSAT score and the GPA of people applying, because the better your numbers are, the more you're going to help them raise their standing in the rankings. And most law schools only have a couple hundred students per class. And so actually each individual student they accept has a fairly significant impact on how they do in the rankings. They look at your LSAT score, they look at your GPA, and all that contributes to the LSAT median and the GPA median that is reported to the American Bar Association, which in turn, US News pulls from for inclusion in the rankings. And so the better your numbers are, the more you're going to help the school maintain and raise its standing in the rankings. And schools will try to incentivize you to choose to attend their school versus a different school because your numbers help them do better in the rankings. So, in other words, if you want to get more scholarship money, you apply to a law school where your numbers are relatively strong. So let's say a given law school had a GPA median of a 3.5 and an LSAT median of a 165. If your GPA was a 3.8 and your LSAT was a 170, you would be above both the GPA median and the LSAT median, and so you'd be a relatively stronger candidate, and the school would have more reason to give you more scholarship money than someone whose numbers were weaker. The better your numbers are, the more you're going to help them. Ideally, you want to be above both the 75th percentile for a given school's LSAT and GPA medians for the best possible outcome. And you can look up all the stats, by the way, in the American Bar Association 509 reports for pretty much any given law school, and you'll be able to see where your numbers, whether real or hypothetical, stack up against their published numbers. KK saying, you can get into a big law without going to a T14. Yes, that's technically true, of course. There are plenty of people who do. But for the best employment outcomes for big law in particular, These firms are recruiting out of the T14 and they heavily value the prestige of the law school. You also want to consider location, right? So a law school will always have a better reputation in its particular region than elsewhere. So, for example, in New York, the top law schools are NYU, Columbia, and Fordham. NYU and Columbia are both T6 law schools, if not T14, of course. But then you also have Fordham, which is not a T14 law school, but still a fairly high ranked school and located in New York City. And so employers are familiar with Fordham, even though it doesn't have the same prestige as NYU or Columbia. And so, sure, you can get into big law going to Fordham rather than NYU or Columbia, but to go to, say, CUNY Law, which is much lower ranked in public, won't have the same prestige associated as going to a T14 or T6 law school. And the big law firms are recruiting more out of NYU and Columbia than they are CUNY, for example, just to paint a more extreme example. Just getting through for more questions here. Keep them coming, folks. Thank you for them. I see Candace is asking, I have a 149 on the LSAT and I want to get to a 160 to 165 for April. Is that possible? Absolutely. I mean, talking 10, 15 points in 2 months, that's definitely an achievable goal. But rather than asking, is it possible, I think a better question is, what would it take to get there? What am I willing to put in? What kind of study plan would it require? So my questions are, well, how many hours do you have available? Can you put in 5, 10 hours a week, or are you going to put in 10, 15 hours a week, or 15 to 20 hours a week? And what kind of support are you going to get to achieve the highest possible increase over this period of time? 2 months is doable, but with an only 2-month time frame, we're going to have to compress and accelerate the support rather than spreading it over the course of 4 to 6 months. And so, for example, for students who want the highest increase in a relatively shorter period of time, we take our standard 4 to 6 month curriculum and we compress and accelerate it into only 2 months by giving you live coaching 7 days a week in a more boot camp style program. So we give you live coaching, one-on-one, small group, a custom study plan, on-demand course. And so if you want to talk through particulars, of course, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. Happy to talk through the details. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Happy to meet with you personally and talk through your plan of attack. I see Gert is asking, for an incoming freshman going into college, what's the top advice you would give to get into law school? Well, first thing is focus on your GPA. So if you're incoming, I'm guessing that you're starting undergrad in roughly 6 months or so. I mean, this is way ahead of schedule. I'd say just enjoy undergrad, maintain a good GPA, explore law, decide what you really want to do. If law school is that in fact the path that you want to pursue? Entering freshmen often change their minds about majors and careers multiple times. So just be open to exploration, trying out different things. Maintaining a GPA that's strong will always help you regardless of what you want to do. Go to class, do the readings, go to office hours, raise your hand in class, be that guy or that girl, no shame in that, and it's going to get you a better grade. Law professors do have a lot of liberty and flexibility when it comes to giving grades, and if you can just show a genuine interest, they'll appreciate that because not everybody does. And then when it comes to sophomore, junior year, if this is really what you want to do, then you could take a cold practice test, see where you're at. Don't get discouraged by it, of course, but use it as a benchmark from which you can measure your later future progress. Most people's practice tests starting off typically don't go that well, and that's okay. It just tells you what you already know, which is that you haven't learned the LSAT yet, but of course you can. I personally started off at a 152. Took me an entire year to reach my 175, and at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I had done it properly, I could have knocked it out in just a couple of months because the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. If you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. And once you do that, everything changes. So be open to learning the logic of the test. There are roughly 60 released practice tests in the modern LSAT format. You get 4 of them for free on LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get the others with a Law Hub Advantage subscription, well worth the investments once you're really getting serious about this. You could do some untimed, do some as individual timed sections, do some as full-length timed practice tests to build up your endurance. But you could knock this out over the course of 6 months. Doesn't need more time than that. If you want a top score, of course, more time is better, and you can take a more slow and steady approach. The LSAT is skills-based, not memorization, so there's no reason to try and cram it unless you really have to. But for anybody watching this now, I mean, we're in mid-February, you could take the LSAT in April with June as a backup test date. You could take it in June with August as a backup test date, and either way, you can still apply to law school the second that applications open in the fall. In other words, there's plenty of time to improve your LSAT score significantly. If you're applying in the fall anyway, don't rush it for April. Give yourself the time that you need to achieve your fullest potential. I think the April LSAT is really best as an early attempt, an early at bat, or if you want to take it late this cycle for scholarship reconsideration. But June gives you 4 months. You still have August that you could register for just for peace of mind for those of you who are applying this fall. I see Braden's asking for a gap year, attempting to raise my LSAT and gain experience. Do you have any tips that would for jobs that would best prepare someone for law school in the interim? Well, jobs, I'm not sure that jobs prepare you for law school, really. They're two different things, right? Jobs are real world experience in an employment context. Law school is academic in nature. So you're reading difficult, dense text. I think that actually the best preparation for law school that you could pursue right now, Braden, is just raise your LSAT score. The LSAT, in other words, is the best pre-law prep you could be doing right now. And as a major side benefit, if not the primary benefit, is that it's going to get you into a better law school. It's going to get you more scholarship money. And so I would, if you can, just focus on raising your LSAT score. And if you need to take a job to pay the bills or fill a gap on your resume, then sure, do that. You could work as a paralegal, for example, or a research assistant for a professor if you want to do something more academic in nature. But studying for the LSAT is probably the best use of your time right now. And if you can afford to work part-time rather than full-time and give yourself more LSAT study time in your schedule, in your day, in your week, that's probably the best way you could spend that time. And you have the liberty of taking a gap year. You can study for the LSAT over the course of 4 to 6 months. You could target June, you could target August, and you could apply this fall, and you could spend the summer working on your application essays. If you can get them in early September, you can take the next year beyond that to just take it easy a little bit, because this is the last easy time you'll have in your life, because you'll start law school a year after that, and then you'll be busy after that. But you've got really potentially 6, 7 months to work on this and just nail it. Would you have a target test date in mind, Braden? I mean, if you're applying this fall, there's really no rush. I wouldn't rush it for April. I would say when you're applying this fall, take it in June, take it in August. And if you want to talk through particulars with this new prep plan in mind, I mean, I'm happy to meet with you personally and talk through what your study plan could look like. Help you make the most of what could be a significant study period, right? Because I mean, most folks who are working full-time or in school full-time, they don't really have a lot of free time to study for the LSAT, and so they have to spread it out over a longer time period, and it's harder to improve. But when you're taking a gap year and you're able to work part-time, perhaps, if you are, then you're in a great position to really knock out the LSAT once and for all, putting in closer to maybe 20 hours a week of LSAT prep versus the 10 hours a week. You can improve a lot faster when you can put in more time. And in terms of prep course options, I see a question about that. I mean, at LSAT Unplugged, we offer more personalized coaching programs. They're not one size fits all. So we look at your current LSAT score, your goal score, and your time frame. And then we see what would it take to get you from here to there over that period of time. We'll typically recommend some version of one-on-one coaching, personalized to you. You'll get access to semi-private small group sessions 4 nights a week, all optional, all recorded for any that you can't make. We also give you a comprehensive on-demand course that you can access anytime for self-study. And then we create for you a personalized study plan laying out exactly what to do from now through your LSAT test date. But every program looks different depending on the student. So if you want to talk through what that plan could look like for you, what your personal coaching program could look like, you can book a free LSAT lesson with me. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That's an open offer, by the way, for anybody watching this now and later. I see mindless scrolling saying, how does my graduate GPA of 384 help? The truth is that it doesn't help, I'm sorry to say. Not really, because for law school admissions purposes, your GPA is only your first undergraduate BA is factored in. That's it. So no secondary BA, no master's GPA. They'll see it, they'll look at it for context, but they're not factoring it into their formal calculations the way they are your undergrad GPA and your LSAT score. In other words, it's nice context, like a soft factor, but it's not factored in numerically the way the other numbers are. In part because not everybody has a graduate GPA, and because presumably your graduate GPA will be higher than your undergrad GPA in most cases. So they discount it and don't factor it in for that reason. Unfortunately, sorry to say. So your undergrad GPA is what it is. And then we combine that with your LSAT score. And the good news is they're going to weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergrad GPA. And so whatever your undergrad GPA is, it is what it is. Probably can't move it too much at this stage, but your LSAT you can improve significantly. If you look at the published law school admissions index for any given law school in almost every single case, they weigh your LSAT more heavily than your undergrad GPA, so you have plenty of room to improve your odds there. I see Jazzy Michelle's asking, what will an addendum do? The truth is it won't do as much as you would like it to do. Sorry to say, but it is context. They will see it, they will read it, but at the end of the day, numbers are still numbers. Law schools will always tell you to write one because it's a good way for them to get rid of you and for you to stop pestering them with questions. And it maybe makes you feel better for them to tell you that, but numbers are numbers. I mean, think about it this way. If you have a low GPA plus an addendum explaining the low GPA and somebody else just has a high GPA, the proof's in the pudding. The high GPA is what matters. That's what goes to the American Bar Association. That's what goes to US News. The best counter to a low GPA is having an upward trajectory on your transcript, meaning your GPA was low, but then you improved it over time. In other words, GPA was low freshman year because bad thing happened, bad thing went away, I raised my GPA. Or if you haven't raised your GPA, if you don't have the upward trend, the other thing you can do to offset a low GPA is to have a higher LSAT score to compensate. In other words, my GPA is bad, but it doesn't reflect my true potential because here, look at my high LSAT score. That is what really shows my true potential, my academic abilities. But if you have low GPA plus low LSAT plus excuses of bad things happening, they're going to be like, okay, well, I get why these bad things could have hurt your numbers, but what actual concrete evidence do you have to show that you are capable beyond these low numbers? If you don't have the evidence to support your claim, then are they going to believe you? Maybe not. Unfortunately, there are lots of applicants, and somebody else with better numbers will have more compelling evidence than you if you only have low numbers. So the best way to offset low numbers is by having high numbers somewhere else. If you have a low GPA, you can offset with a high LSAT. If you have a low GPA freshman year, high GPA later can offset that. If you have a low LSAT but a high GPA, that can also offset the low LSAT. But then my question is, well, why not just retake the LSAT at a higher score than have a high GPA and a high LSAT? That's going to do a lot better for you, a lot better for your chances, in other words. And so all that to say, if an addendum makes you feel better, go ahead and write it. I'm not going to say not to do it, but don't count on it to offset low numbers. If you are going to write an addendum, make it concise, matter of fact. Don't make excuses. Just explain, here's what happened, here's how it affected me, And here's why this won't be an issue for me again going forward. In other words, this will not be a persistent reason why I will not succeed in law school. This bad thing happened or this thing affected me. I was sick, I had a family issue, whatnot. But now I'm older, more mature. Bad thing won't be a factor again in the future. I've learned from the experience, won't happen again. I'm now ready to succeed in law school and I'll do better going forward. And here's the evidence why. For example, higher LSAT or upward trend on my GPA after that one bad semester or that one bad year. Or I transferred from here to there and then things got better. I see a follow-up from Jazzy asking, what about high numbers freshman year, then lower sophomore, and high numbers straight A senior? Okay, so that's still an upward trend. I mean, sounds like you had a temporary dip, but then upward trajectory following it, and that's ultimately the most important thing. In other words, you want to end on a high note. High followed by low is much worse than low followed by high because the most recent is the most relevant. And they're going to see high followed by low, like, will bad things keep continuing? Or low followed by high, okay, difficult start, but things improved. Or things dipped temporarily because of random bad thing is gone, numbers went up after that. And by the way, the most recent number you will have is your LSAT score, presumably post-undergrad, and so that is the highest number you can share for an upward trajectory continuing even out of undergrad. In other words, let's say you finished undergrad in 2024 and then you took the LSAT 2025 or 2026, which is an even better reflection on where you are today. And that number is even better, relatively speaking. I see Cassandra is asking, the LSAC digital forum is today. What questions should I ask or what should I look out for? I would always, whenever talking to law schools in general, I would ask about things that you are genuinely interested in. So in other words, don't just ask for the sake of asking. Do some research on the schools. Ask about employment outcomes. Ask about pipelines to particular careers that you personally want to pursue. Are there certain clinics that you're interested in? Questions that cannot be answered on the website, maybe personal questions about professors or classes, but things that you could not easily answer with a Google search, like, what's your LSAT median? That would be a pretty bad question because you could answer that in 2 seconds by Googling it, right? Or searching the ABA 509 report for a given school. I would try to look past the marketing, the glossy brochures, anything that feels like an advertisement. Look at the concrete specifics, the stats. And then you want to ask about honestly, the return on investment. Is this law school worth going to given their outcomes? You could ask time-sensitive questions around this particular cycle as well. You could ask about the coming Grad Plus loans the end of the Grad Plus loans, and ask about how that will affect merit aid. I'm sure they'll love to hear that one. I'm joking there. They don't love that topic, but it's important to know what you're getting into financially. So I would look to do the research first and then think about what it's ultimately going to cost you to attend. But do the research first now. In other words, don't do it while the forum's happening. Go online now for your top choice school. Dig into the ABA 509 numbers. Dig into those schools relative to the career or outcomes you want to pursue. And then ask about what percentage of graduates go into that field, for example, or what kind of support their career services office support offers to help you get into that job. I see Jazzy's asking, what happens if you get a second bachelor's degree? Doesn't count. In other words, if you're looking to offset a low undergraduate GPA, the best thing you can do is get a higher LSAT score. The first bachelor's is what counts. The second bachelor's does not count for your LSAT calculated GPA. And so you would either redo classes that you already did in undergrad to have a pretty minuscule impact on your undergrad GPA, or you just get a higher LSAT score. Easier path is get a higher LSAT score because it weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined, whereas doing one class from one part of undergrad will have a pretty negligible impact. I see Gabrielle's asking, should I do any studying or prep before taking a diagnostic test? I don't think you need to. I mean, really, what's the point of the diagnostic, right? The diagnostic is to get a snapshot of where you're at right now, and then allow you to establish a benchmark or a baseline from which to measure future progress. But you could also take more than one diagnostic, right? So you could take a diagnostic today with no studying, take one in 2 weeks after doing a bit of studying, take another 2 weeks after that, and then take one once a week in the month or two leading up to the exam. And a lot of this, of course, depends on the particulars. In other words, when are you planning on taking the LSAT? If you're taking it in 2 months, we've really got to compress and accelerate the time frame. If you're taking it in 6 months, you can take a more of a slow and steady approach for your prep. And Gabrielle, if you want to talk through the particulars of what your prep plan should look like, of course, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me. The link's in my bio. I'm happy to talk through particulars for you there, but a lot of these answers depend on your time frame and your goals. I see Aaron's asking about recommendations for someone just getting started. So this kind of relates to Gabrielle's question. So when you're just getting started, you can take a cold diagnostic to see where you're at, but don't over-index on the result. Just tells you that you haven't learned the language of the LSAT yet, but you can over time. At LSAT Unplugged, we divide prep into 5 major phases using the LASER approach. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. It's the cornerstone of our courses and our coaching programs. L is for learning, building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. For example, in logical reasoning, you have roughly 15 different types of questions like strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, and so on. You've also got reading comprehension to work on. Then phase 3, you have S for sections, working on pacing and time management, doing 35-minute sections to work on how you're allocating time over the course of the section. Then you have E for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests. And then finally R for review, using the Socratic review method. And so if you had, say, 6 months till your test, if you're taking it in August, you've got 2 months for working on learning and accuracy, working on the foundation and drilling, 2 months on sections, working on your pacing, and then 2 months on endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests. And of course, those are just the primary emphases of each phase. We work on the particulars based on your weak areas in the coaching program. We personalize the schedule further for you there, but that's a painting with a broad brush what the prep should look like. We always have you using official, actual LSAT practice tests from the Law School Admissions Council. And so you get those on LSAC's Law Hub platform. For review, we use the Socratic review method, where we're actually not explaining things the way that a book would or the way that a video would. We're actually getting into your thought process, your approach, your step-by-step, because we're not going to be there on test day. We can't take it for you. So we've got to give you the confidence, the clarity, and the skill to perform when it truly matters. And so we ask you a series of guiding questions. For example, was it your approach to the question, or was it the text of the question? Was it a tempting wrong answer choice, or was it an unappealing right answer choice? Because if we can get down to the root cause, we're going to nip it in the bud, and you don't make the same mistake again. And so that review process gets beyond the explanations, because a lot of folks will use explanations as a crutch, which is a huge mistake, because that's someone else's supposedly perfect way of solving the question when they already had the hindsight bias of knowing the correct answer. In other words, it might technically explain the logic of the question, but it would not adequately reflect the process that a student should undergo to solve the question under timed conditions, seeing it for the first time. And so we're more focused on practical application that you could actually replicate on test day if you were to encounter a similar question in the future with maybe different surface level window dressing using a different topic, different framing, but has the same underlying structure or logic of the question. And so if you want to talk through your prep plan, of course, you can book the free LSAT lesson with me through the link in my bio, and we could talk through specifics there. And by the way, folks, if you're just joining, I do these lives every single weekday same time, same place. You can share the link in your socials, on Discord, subreddit, Facebook, and so on. I do these lives on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. Please spread the word if you find these helpful. I don't do any advertising for them, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So your spreading the word is the only way this grows. I see Cassandra's asking, do we also review personal statements? So yeah, we do help with that as well for our students, but we typically recommend focusing on the LSAT first and foremost because that's going to be the biggest needle mover to increase your admissions chances. In other words, if you don't already have the LSAT score, your application essays are not going to make the difference. You got to have the number first and foremost. And a lot of times students will use the essays as a distraction from actually studying for the LSAT. And so if you were a student in our program, I'd say to you, yeah, pause on the essays, lock in the LSAT score. Once you've taken the LSAT, you've got roughly 3 weeks while you're waiting to get your score back. And during those 3 weeks, we can go hard on your essays, but until you've taken the LSAT and gotten your practice test scores at or above your goal, let's start with the LSAT first. I see Cassandra saying, I've got to work double time on my LSAT because my LSAT GPA is going to screw me. Okay, yeah, so I mean, that's a lot of students are in that exact same position, right? Your GPA is below what you wanted it to be, and LSAT's calculation often reduces it or lowers it further, right? So we've got to get your LSAT up there to compensate. So all the more reason to say, hold off on the essays, just lock in that LSAT, get it in the bag, get the score, then circle back on that. Thanks for all the questions, folks. Keep them coming. I'm just getting through here for more. I see Tenacious is asking, at what point does an LSAT score begin to offset the GPA? I'll say it this way. I mean, if your GPA is subpar, if it's below the median of the school to which you're applying, you want to be that much higher above the LSAT median to compensate. So let's say if your GPA was at a school's 25th percentile, you want your LSAT to be above the school's 75th percentile. The worse your GPA, the better you want your LSAT to be. And really, I mean, I would say it this way also that, I mean, no reason not to shoot for a 180, right? In other words, always aim for the highest LSAT score possible. I mean, we could set goal scores, but in reality, you just want to understand everything and get the highest possible score. Don't leave any points on the table. I see Cassandra's asking how to sign up with me. Okay, so to book the free LSAT lesson with me, if you're on TikTok or Instagram, the link is in my bio. Just click my profile, click the bio link, and you'll be able to access the link to book the free LSAT lesson with me. You'll be taken to my calendar to choose a time. If nothing works for you on the calendar, just text me. I'll try to squeeze you in at some other time. Those are private one-on-one calls with me personally. I'll talk through your LSAT plan of attack with you. We'll talk through your current LSAT score, your goal score, your time frame, your target test date, and we'll craft a plan of attack to get you from here to there between now and then without burning out. That's the goal. And to get you the highest possible increase in whatever your time frame is. And so if you're taking it in 4 months, in June, for example, your prep plan is going to look very different than if you're taking it in 2 months in April, for example. June's more of a slow and steady approach. April's more accelerated because we have less time. And any program we include is probably going to involve some form of personalized support with one-on-one coaching because that's the best way to improve. We also create for you a custom study plan. You get access to live semi-private sessions in the evenings, but they're all optional and all recorded for any that you can't make. You also get our comprehensive on-demand course as well. So happy to talk through particulars with you. I see Lucas saying, I have a 4.0 LSAC GPA. Awesome. That's great. Can't ask for much better than that. But I've got a 153 LSAT. Where does that put me as an applicant? Okay, so your LSAC GPA is incredible. Awesome. Love to see it. That your LSAT is a bit below what I would like to see, though. So that makes you a reverse splitter with a high GPA and a lower LSAT, which is unfortunate, right? So we got to raise your LSAT score. That's the best thing we could do right now for any given school you might be looking at. The number one thing you could do right now at this stage of the process is study more for the LSAT, get a higher score. If you could reach a 170, or even better, 175, you would have such radically different outcomes. It's not even funny. You would have such better outcomes for getting into better schools, getting more scholarship money, maybe even get a full ride, as Stacy's saying. Exactly. Stacy says, take it again, Luke, for a full ride. Yeah, so retake the LSAT. That's the best thing you can do. And honestly, I think that you're in a better position than a lot of folks because your GPA is already great. And it's a lot easier to retake the LSAT than to redo all of undergrad. So my best advice is retake the LSAT, get your score up 20 points or so. It could save you $250,000 by getting you a full ride to law school, and you could literally pay nothing for law school, or even better, you could get paid to go to law school by getting a living stipend on top of getting a full ride. So that's the best move for you at this stage. That's the number one thing you should do. I see a shout out from DJ here. Awesome, DJ. Glad you're enjoying the program. Appreciate the kind words. Glad that's helpful for you. Yeah, DJ's a student in our program, just joined recently. That's awesome. Dean Bean's asking, is it fine to take the GRE instead? I mean, very few people get in with GRE scores. Law schools make a lot of noise about it, but if you look at the stats, I think for this last cycle, 41,000 people who went to law school took the LSAT. Roughly 400 took the GRE. In other words, only about 1% of matriculating students took the GRE, and the other 99% took the LSAT. So that kind of tells you how popular it is and how much it's going to help you get in. Typically, when people get into law school without the LSAT, it's because they are a non-traditional student with a really impressive background and work experience that offsets the fact that they have not taken the LSAT. And the unfortunate thing about going non-LSAT is that you also are sacrificing scholarships. One of the best ways to get scholarship money for law school and to make yourself a more attractive candidate is by applying with a good LSAT score. If your LSAT score is a big question mark or an NA, not applicable, then you're not helping the schools raise their LSAT medians. And so they're not going to reward you with scholarship money to compensate you for that. And so if you had some really impressive work experience or background, or STEM, for example, some reason why they would love to have you there despite the lack of an LSAT score, then maybe. But the LSAT score, applying with a higher LSAT score above the median, it's some of the easiest money you'll ever make in terms of getting discounts on your tuition. And so that's typically the best way to go. And you can see this for yourself on the American Bar Association website if you want to see the particulars. See another question here that came in from Phaedra asking, do you think passing the patent bar exam would help with admission if I have a low GPA? I mean, maybe, but kind of like working on the application essays or getting a job as a paralegal. I mean, this all seems like a rather circuitous way to just avoid doing the number one thing that's going to help with admission, which is the LSAT. Like you're telling me that rather than study for the LSAT, which is the proven pathway to getting into better law schools, to getting more scholarship money, you're going to try and pass this other exam instead that it sounds like you're not actually interested in pursuing, like working as a patent on the patent bar. Like you want to just go to law school. Do you want to work in patents in particular? I know we've spoken in the past and this never came up before, right? I mean, I'm thinking like, if your goal here is just to go to law school, then why not take the law school admission test, not the patent bar exam, which is a totally different exam for a different purpose, to maybe add another line to your resume. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me to pursue this other path when there's a more clear, direct path from here to there, which is using the law school exam in particular. If you want to do patent law and not go to law school, then yeah, do the patent bar. But if your goal is to go to law school and pass the actual bar exam, then just do that. I don't see a reason for an intermediate step between here and there. If you're already here, you're already pursuing law school admissions, you want to do your law school applications to get a 3-year JD degree, then just do that. Don't do anything else because you think it's going to look good for law school admissions. Unless you already have the LSAT score officially secured, you've done the essays and you have a year to kill because you're taking the gap year, then sure, do something else. But in the absence of that, let's just do the LSAT score. Let's just get the highest possible LSAT score, get into better law schools, get more scholarship money. That's the number one path forward. And if you'd like my help with that, of course, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link's below the video, pinned in the chat. Happy to help. I'll be back tomorrow, folks. Same time, same place. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.